Hello and welcome once again to the 100-day art challenge. This is going to be the last of a series of oil pastel portraits that I make. So if you're interested in seeing the previous submissions, then they will be in a playlist on my channel. Please check them out. They weren't all oil pastel portraits, but there were a lot. I did a lot of oil pastel portraits because I really enjoyed the medium. And I found that the more I would use them, the more I would learn about them, which is quite obvious. But for me, it was not something I'd planned on doing, and it became just a convenience to use them when I was falling behind. I was trying at one point to keep up with the daily upload, a daily challenge, and upload every day, but it turned out to be unfeasible. Considering the workload I was managing at the time, I didn't want it to compromise my commissioned work. So instead, I had to just put a pause on the art making at some point and then return to it when it was more convenient. So I've made quite a few, and now what I'm doing is catching up on YouTube and doing a daily upload of a lot of the work I've been making. I haven't at this point finished the 100 submissions, but I'm certainly quite far along. So at the moment, I think we're on something like, this would be maybe number 34. You'll have to check in the description box. I've started to update the number on YouTube. Now that submission number is different on Instagram, so you'll see a different order on my Instagram account, you know, which art pieces I made and when I uploaded them. But even that's different from the ones which I made and didn't upload them, and there's a reason for that. I may as well quickly go into it. On Instagram, because there is a grid system where it's three in a row, 3 squares I should say in a row, and then that's just a vertical scroll where you can scroll up and down. If anyone checks out my account, I like that grid system of 3 to line up, and it's become a little bit of I think it may be OCD, I'm not too sure, but I want something in the middle to be different than what's on the left and right. So that's how I've started to decide which art pieces I upload in which order on Instagram, which is different from how I've uploaded them on YouTube, and both of those are different from the art that I've made in the order in which I've made them. So that's just how it's worked out. I don't think it's important to the challenge so long as I upload 100 pieces. I don't really care if it's in 100 days consecutive, one after the other, or if it's in the order in which I made them. I think so long as there's 100 pieces at the end of the challenge, that'll be something to show and to share. There is a video that I'm going to make for tomorrow that I'm looking forward to, which will be celebrating the 1,000 subscriber mark, which happened a few days ago. I mean, currently the date today is Monday the 23rd of September 2024, so it was probably around the 20th or something, I don't know, but it was very recent, and I was very happy to see that milestone be reached, because I've been working on this channel for 2 years or so, and I've been hoping to grow my audience, and thankfully I'm now in a position where I can feed the channel certain videos and ideas in series. And I did have something which I made recently, a series of videos I should say, which was a bit of a more somber series called The Dirty Corner, and that was about my bad experiences at art school. And I wanted to do it because every time someone would ask me where I studied, I would then tell them where I studied, and instead of just letting that linger in the air as if I was saying it was a good place to study, or let them be credited with the work that I was currently producing, I would then have to do a bit of a dumping out of all the stories and thoughts and feelings about what happened there and why I think it wasn't a good environment for the students. And instead I thought, if I make this into a video series, I can say to people, here's where I studied, and if you're interested, there's a series on my YouTube channel, a playlist called The Dirty Corner. Now, I made that just before I continued with this 100-day art challenge, and it's nice to now brighten up the channel with something more positive and colourful and interesting than what was happening in that series, because of how just how sombre it became due to the subject matter. So that's there if you're interested to see it. I put a lot of work into it, and I was being as honest as I could, as I always try to be. And then this series is me trying to just keep up with the creative impulse and the fight against not making things at times when you really don't feel motivated, or you've had a busy day, or you're just tired for some reason, and trying to get over that. And having a challenge there to push you to make a piece of art anyway is a great motivator, and I really enjoy the fact that it's kicked me into making more art. For most of this year, before starting this challenge, I don't think I'd made very much art at all. Maybe 1 or 2 drawings or something small, just really insignificant amounts of work. And then Petra, my friend from university, she suggested doing this 100-day art challenge. So I appreciate that, because not only has it got me making pieces of artwork, it's got me into a medium which I really didn't use for the whole time that I've been making art. I've tried it a little bit, but not nearly enough to learn anything about it, and that is oil paints, and that's coming after this piece here. Well, after this piece that you're watching here today, actually, I'll be doing the 1000 subscriber celebration video tomorrow, which is going to be a big image of some kind that I'm going to create. But after that will be the oil paintings that I've been making. So again, chronologically out of order, but I didn't want to interrupt the oil pastel portraits with a celebration and then continue with oil pastel portraits. I thought it would make more sense, and perhaps this speaks to my OCD again, to have a run of oil pastel portraits, and then at the end of that do my 1000 subscriber celebration video and thanking everyone for supporting the channel, and then after that continuing with the challenge, but with oil painting, which is not featured on this challenge yet. And it is a bit of a journey at the start, so you'll have to bear with me. I mean, I try to make something for every submission which is worth looking at and worth listening to as far as the process and what I learned throughout. But for oil painting, it was a difficult kind of wrestling period for my understanding of the medium, and there's reasons for that which I'll go into in those videos. But for now, I'll just say that this portrait which I'm making is once again from an Instagram account called Earth's World, and I will feature them in the description box. There will be a link to their account, and they're on the screen now. I think they're a fantastic account for source material, for inspiration. If you use them, just give them credit. They're aware that I've been using their work and they like my uploads. They've been liking my posts on Instagram. So I think that giving them credit is the only fair way to go about it. And this is one of those references, one of their portrait photography uploads that just stood out to me. I always like when people wear large brimmed hats like this anyway, but it was the red hair, it was the straight on look, which I rarely have for a lot of my oil pastel portraits. It will be either 3/4 or it'll be a side profile, and I don't think I've had anyone looking straight at the camera yet. I could be wrong, but certainly one of very few. So it was how to tackle the hat, because the hat has gaps in it. So it's not a solid hat which just casts a shadow. It's a hat which casts a kind of netted shadow on the face, which I thought was really interesting. And it made the portrait more engaging because of how the shadows fall on the face and follow the contours of the face. Created a challenge, but it also made it very exciting for me as a subject and as a challenge to tackle. But it was the tonality, the shadows on the face. I just found a lot of it really inspiring, and that's what motivates my art making a lot of the time. Will be either the light or the shapes, and it's got a bit of both in this. Really, is you've got this lovely shape of the hair, of the hat, and the shadows on the face. And the shadows are shapes and light, but then you've got the shadows which I've done so far, which I really like the shapes of the shadows, but then as well you have the shadows cast by the hat, and that's just an added aesthetic boost for me, inspiration wise, to make this piece. And yeah, I hope that it's something which you can understand, why I'm gravitating towards these images of people. And I do really enjoy capturing someone's likeness, however loose it is. It's still something which I like to try and attempt to do. And then after this series of portraits, the oil painting is a combination of landscape and still life. So that's going to be a nice way to adjust the focus from this run of portraiture into just different subject matter, just tackling different things. Certain things I like to do from imagination as well, so I'm going to start creating those, and there've been a couple of uploads where I've done those. I did a video about having 20 or so subscribers until I reached the 1,000 subscriber mark, and that was from imagination. It was just I don't know how to explain it, just very complicated little doodles inside of the numbers 20, and then the letters which make up also to go. And I also did a drawing from imagination doodle on Procreate, so it's a digital sketch. So those have been from imagination, and I'm trying to create soon. There will be a series of abstract images that I'll be making, first digitally, but then possibly I'll be making them in real life if the commission goes ahead, because these are going to be preliminary sketches that I use to pitch for a job. So I'll just talk about that in those uploads that will be happening soon. And then I'm also going to be making signs, and I consider that to be art, because it will be signs about art for sale, and I'm going to be drawing and painting those. I've cut the wood, so I'm going to be uploading the process video for that, and also showing the signs being put up. So all of this is things which I'm hoping to fill the rest of the challenge with. And also I'm considering doing Inktober this year, and I may not make it too difficult for myself. I'm going to try to make it something which is has some life and spontaneity to it, but also can be very loose. But I want it to be worthwhile, but at the same time, you know, all of these, sorry, I'm saying but after everything. I want it to contribute to the uploads and to the benefit of the channel as well. I want it to show how you can be playful and loose and spontaneous, and yet use the fundamentals and foundation of knowledge that you've built up through studying perspective, proportion, light and shadow, tonality, and all these things which are so important, and I really do hold up as very essential rules to understand, even if your intention is just to completely break all those rules afterwards. So long as you understand those rules, I think it gives you this power to break and bend those rules more liberally than if you were to not understand how perspective or tonal values or proportion or anything like that works. Then you're just lost in, you know, some things just not being measured right, and you don't really know why. Some things work and you don't understand why it works, and you know, you'd be completely lost. But to understand the rules just basically, you'll be able to just consciously say, I'm not going to use, or I'm going to consciously misuse perspective in this piece, and that's something you'll be able to do because you understand how it works. I think that's really important. I don't think there'll be anything that could be a negative by knowing these rules, and I could be wrong, and if someone can correct me on that, then please let me know, because I just couldn't see how that would be true, to understand perspective and then that ruin your art making. I think that if you're going to ignore perspective or negate it, you can do that far better by understanding it, I think. And the same for, you know, tonal values and proportion and everything else. There's lots of other rules that you will come across And some people don't like the idea that it gets called rules, but I consider them to be rules because they can be bent and broken and learnt and adhered to. So that's that. For this piece, again, you can see the development here, getting in the darker shadow areas, and I think it really develops nicely, getting some yellow into the orange of the hair, and now using the black, which is tiny, the black which I'm using. So you can see how I'm just pinching this really small block, or the remainder of a block of an oil pastel. Oh, it's a brown, sorry, it's not a black. I'm getting the brown in there to give some tonality to the hair and to show where the light isn't hitting the hair quite as strong. And I think just like that, it looks like quite a strong portrait, but thankfully there's more to go, because I think that what's left is what gives this a real punchy impact. Because as much as I like the flat shadows on the face, I think that because it has this netted shadow that I need to tackle in a moment, that is quite an exciting addition to the portraits. But you can see just those shadows and light on the face there is really a nice look, I think. And so now I decide that I'm going to try to get the skin in there. Even though I like the colour of the cardboard with the shadow colour, I think if I can get a skin colour in there, it will blend with the other shadows that I've made, and it transforms the texture as well of the portrait. And texture is another rule which is worth learning. It's another discipline that you can explore, because it's a very important aspect of art making. If you're going to do still life, you need texture to describe the surface areas and drapery and things like that, which I think it is really easy to appreciate in other art making that you see in museums or galleries. It's always beautiful to see how people describe fabrics or lace or firm textures or kind of glass, and everything which can be described in this way is an addition to the visceral experience of the viewer and visitor of the space. And now that I have got in the skin tone, it hasn't been a heavy blend like I've done before, where I really push into the shadow areas, but it's coverage on the face to distinguish the light from the shadow. And this is how I start to do this netted shadow on the face, is I find an edge for this medium brown and try to make the lines as thin and wispy as possible, because oil pastels are very blunt instruments, and I'm trying to curve the shadows here. Can you see I'm doing arching curves on the face? That to me is what adds a lot to the netted shadows on the face, is to try and show some curvature of the planes of the face and how the shadows are cast on her face there. I love that. And then adding touches of it into the hat itself, because the hat was done with a darker brown. I think all of these contributions add a lot of interest to what turns out as my favourite of this series, I think. And I've said my favourite before was a really loose one of a chap, which I did earlier on. And I do really like the portrait where I don't even fully render the face. But this is my favourite otherwise, because it's a lot more rendering. So there's always advantages to both approaches. If you want to do a very loose portrait and hardly render the eyes or the mouth at all, and you just suggest them loosely, I love that. But then something like this, where you actually put a lot of effort into putting details in the right places, and even do these thin wispy lines for shadows on the face, that makes it my favourite as well, because it's got so much contrast between the blunt, dry push of these oil pastel sticks on the surface, and how loose and interpretive they can be, impressionistic I should say they can be, compared to the contrast of the thinner and more considered and carefully applied marks of the edge of an oil pastel, just like I was pushing dots into the top there of the light hitting the top of the hat, because otherwise it would have been a blank space, and I'm trying to put information in the right places. But the focal point for this should really be the face, and that's where I think the contrast should draw your eyes of the light and dark. Always you can see me here collecting these little flakes and crumbs that come off the oil pastels, and that's always the case every time when you use oil pastels. They do build up in a kind of flaky texture on the surface. But there she is, the final portraits for my oil pastel run for this series of the 100-day art challenge. And there's lots more to go, there's lots of fun to be had, and I may even return to oil pastels again. I've thought about it and thought about what that means and what I'll have to do to return to oil pastels, because it can't be just doing more of this again. It could be, but to me it can't be, because I've done this series now of portraiture, so I need to now push into different areas, and it can't just be still life, because I've uploaded one still life of flowers. So I need to really consider what else I'd like to do with oil pastels, and the potential that they have does really speak to me regarding its uses in mixed media, and I think that's possibly more likely how I would introduce them again. And I've tried it before, but only very loosely. It's a possibility for that series of abstracts that I'm creating soon, I mentioned earlier, because I'd like there to be a contrast between painted areas and more textured areas that I'm going to try to achieve with the difference between what paint looks like on a surface and what oil pastel can do in combination with that. But for this series of portraiture, it was just oil pastels on their own, and I think that gave me a real gift of understanding for how they blended with each other, how they work on the surface, and compared to how I used to use them, I think I've really gained a bit of knowledge about how they work, and I very much enjoyed it. Thanks for watching the video, and I will see you tomorrow.